A college student sat quietly in seat 23F, textbooks in hand, secrets buried deep. But when pilots collapsed at 37,000 feet and death whispered through contaminated air, her hands gripped the controls. The Black Hawks came, not to rescue her but to salute. She was never just a student. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Seattle-Tacoma International Airport as Maya Chin stood in the security line at Terminal C, shifting her weight from one sneaker to the other. She wore faded jeans, a gray University of Washington hoodie, and carried a navy backpack stuffed with organic chemistry textbooks. Her dark hair fell in a casual ponytail, and she had the tired look of a student who'd stayed up late studying before an early flight. At the TSA checkpoint, the officer glanced at her boarding pass without interest. "Flight 447 to Dulles?" he asked mechanically. Maya nodded with a small smile. "Heading home for a few days." He waved her through without a second thought, and she collected her belongings, slinging her backpack over one shoulder as she made her way toward gate C-24. The gate area was already filling with passengers when Maya arrived 45 minutes before departure. Flight 447 was a popular route, a direct connection from Seattle to Washington Dulles International Airport serving business travelers, government workers, and students traveling between coasts. She found an empty seat near the large windows overlooking the tarmac and pulled out her chemistry textbook, flipping to a chapter on molecular structures heavily annotated with colored highlighter. To anyone observing her, she appeared exactly what she seemed: a college student trying to squeeze in last-minute studying before a long flight. Around her, the gate filled with the usual cross-section of travelers. A businessman in an expensive suit typed furiously on his laptop while talking into a wireless headset about quarterly projections. A young mother struggled to keep two small children entertained with coloring books and juice boxes. An elderly couple sat holding hands, their matching windbreakers suggesting they were returning from a Pacific Northwest vacation. Several rows away, a group of college-age travelers laughed at something on their phones, their casual clothes marking them as students. When her boarding group was called, Maya stood and joined the line, moving slowly toward the jet bridge. The gate agent scanned her mobile boarding pass with a cheerful, "Have a great flight," and she entered the narrow corridor connecting the terminal to the aircraft. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant with perfectly styled blonde hair greeted her warmly. "Welcome aboard." Maya smiled politely and made her way through the first-class cabin where passengers were already settling into wider seats with pre-departure beverages, continuing into the economy section. Her seat was 23F, a window seat about two-thirds of the way back. She stuffed her backpack into the overhead bin, keeping only her textbook and phone, then slid into her seat and buckled the seatbelt. A middle-aged woman in business casual soon appeared beside her row, checking her boarding pass before settling into the middle seat with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, looks like we're neighbors." Maya returned the smile and shifted toward the window to give her seatmate more room. "No problem at all." The woman noticed the chemistry textbook in Maya's lap and nodded toward it. "Student?" Maya nodded. "Yeah, junior year at UW. Heading back to DC to visit family for a few days." The woman's expression brightened. "Oh, how nice. What are you studying?" Maya glanced at her textbook. "Pre-med, so lots of chemistry and biology right now. The glamorous life of memorizing molecular structures." The woman laughed sympathetically. "Well, good for you. My daughter is in her first year at Georgetown and she's already complaining about her workload." The aisle seat was taken by a young man in his 20s wearing khakis and a polo shirt, who offered a brief nod before immediately putting in earbuds and closing his eyes. As final passengers boarded and flight attendants began their safety demonstration, Maya appeared to study her textbook, though her eyes occasionally flickered toward emergency exit rows and flight attendant positions. Everything about her posture and demeanor suggested a typical student passenger, perhaps slightly nervous about flying, focused on studies and looking forward to seeing family. What none of her fellow passengers could possibly know, what the flight attendants had no reason to suspect, and what even the pilots in the cockpit would never have guessed, was that Maya Chen's student identity was carefully constructed cover for her actual profession. She was Captain Maya Chen, United States Army Special Operations Aviation Regiment, a tactical operations specialist with advanced training in crisis management, emergency response, and high-risk rescue operations. Her 6 years of service included deployments to 3 continents, classified missions that would never appear in official records, and specialized training few civilians could imagine existed. Her assignment in Seattle had been deep cover operation lasting 8 months, living as a student while providing tactical support and intelligence coordination for a multi-agency task force tracking weapons trafficking through Pacific Northwest ports. The mission had concluded successfully 2 weeks earlier, and she was returning to Fort Belvoir in Virginia for debriefing before her next assignment. The Boeing 737 pushed back from the gate right on schedule, and the pilots' voices came over the intercom with standard announcements about flight time, altitude, and weather conditions at their destination. Maya felt the familiar sensation of the aircraft turning and beginning to taxi toward the runway, engines spooling up as they joined the queue of departing flights. The takeoff was smooth and routine, acceleration pressing passengers back into their seats as the aircraft lifted off and climbed steeply over Puget Sound. Maya watched the city fall away below, familiar landmarks of Seattle growing smaller as the aircraft banked eastward and continued climbing through scattered clouds. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated for 15 minutes as they reached cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, then the tone chimed and the captain's voice returned with permission to move about the cabin. Flight attendants began their beverage service, rolling carts down narrow aisles taking orders for coffee, juice, and soft drinks. Maya accepted a cup of water when the cart reached her row, and her seatmate ordered coffee while making small talk with the flight attendant about weather in Washington. They chatted briefly about differences between Seattle and Washington, about challenges of managing schoolwork while traveling, about the woman's daughter at Georgetown adjusting to college life away from home. The flight settled into peaceful monotony characterizing cross-country air travel, the steady drone of engines and quiet conversations creating white noise backdrop as the Boeing 737 traced its route across Washington state into Idaho. Maya returned to her textbook, though no longer actively studying. Her mind had shifted into passive awareness mode. Her training had developed, a state where she appeared relaxed while actually maintaining continuous environmental monitoring. 2 hours into the flight over Montana, Maya noticed the first subtle indication something was wrong. The aircraft's engine note had changed slightly, a barely perceptible shift in pitch suggesting thrust setting adjustment. A moment later, the aircraft banked gently left, which could have been routine course correction but felt slightly sharper than normal. Then the cockpit door opened suddenly and a flight attendant emerged moving quickly down the aisle toward the rear, her expression tight with poorly concealed concern. She spoke briefly with another attendant near the aft galley, and though Maya couldn't hear the conversation over engine noise, she could read the body language clearly. Something was wrong in the cockpit. The two attendants returned forward together, moving with practiced calm but noticeable urgency. One picked up the intercom handset near the forward galley. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign due to expected turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened." But there was no turbulence. The air outside was smooth and clear, and Maya felt no atmospheric disturbance that would prompt such an announcement. Her seatmate sighed and closed her laptop. "I hate turbulence," the woman muttered. Maya made a sympathetic sound but said nothing, her attention now fully focused on subtle indicators that something more serious was developing. 5 minutes later, one of the senior flight attendants, a woman in her 50s with a name tag reading Patricia, emerged from the cockpit and moved through the cabin with barely controlled urgency. She stopped at several rows, speaking quietly to passengers, clearly looking for someone with specific qualifications. Maya watched as Patricia approached a man in business attire several rows ahead. "Sir, are you a pilot or do you have any aviation experience?" The man shook his head, looking confused and concerned. Patricia thanked him and continued down the aisle, repeating her question. When Patricia reached Maya's row, she looked at all three occupants with the same urgent question. "Excuse me, do any of you have pilot training or aviation experience?" Maya's seatmate shook her head, and the young man in the aisle seat removed his earbuds with a confused expression. "No what? What's going on?" Patricia forced a calm smile. "Just a precaution, sir. What about you, miss?" She was looking at Maya now, and Maya could see fear behind the professional composure. Maya met Patricia's eyes and made a split-second decision. Years of training emphasized maintaining cover under all circumstances, but she also recognized genuine crisis. She kept her voice low and calm. "I need to know what's happening before I can help. Is there a problem with the pilots?" Patricia hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal, then leaned closer and spoke quietly so other passengers wouldn't overhear. "The captain is unconscious, possible heart attack. The first officer is trying to fly the aircraft but he's also feeling ill, and we've lost some navigation systems. We've declared an emergency and we're trying to reach the nearest airport, but we need someone who understands aircraft systems." Her voice cracked slightly, and Maya could see the terror she was fighting to suppress. Maya glanced at her seatmate, who was watching with growing alarm, then looked back at Patricia. "I have extensive aviation training and crisis management experience," she said quietly, her voice taking on different quality, the careful student inflection dropping away to reveal command presence underneath. "Take me to the cockpit immediately." Patricia's eyes widened at the transformation in Maya's demeanor, but she didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and gestured for Maya to follow. As Maya unbuckled and stood, her seatmate grabbed her arm. "Wait, you're a student, how do you know about flying planes?" Maya looked at the woman for a moment, then gave a small, tight smile. "I'm not exactly what I appear to be. Stay calm, help keep other passengers calm, and everything is going to be okay." Before the woman could respond, Maya was moving up the aisle behind Patricia, her entire bearing shifting from casual student to focused professional. The cockpit door was secured, but Patricia had the access code. She opened it to reveal controlled crisis. The captain, a man in his late 50s with gray hair, was slumped in the left seat, unconscious and breathing shallowly. The first officer, younger but pale and sweating, was gripping the controls with white knuckles, his eyes flickering between instrument panels and the windscreen. Multiple warning lights illuminated the panel, and Maya immediately recognized signatures of cascading system failures. The first officer turned his head as they entered. "Who are you?" "We need a doctor, not another passenger." He broke off as a wave of nausea clearly hit him, and he fought to maintain control. Maya moved immediately to the jump seat behind the center console, her eyes scanning instruments with practiced efficiency. "First officer, my name is Captain Maya Chin, United States Army Special Operations Aviation Regiment. I have over 2,000 flight hours including emergency rescue operations and crisis management. I need you to focus and give me a situation report right now." The authority in her voice cut through the first officer's panic, and he responded automatically. "Captain Williams is unconscious, we think cardiac arrest. I started feeling sick about 10 minutes ago, dizziness and nausea getting worse. We've lost GPS navigation, the autopilot won't engage, and multiple system warnings. I declared an emergency and ATC is vectoring us toward Salt Lake City, but I don't know if I can maintain control long enough." His voice was shaking and sweat dripped from his forehead. Maya was already assessing with rapid processing her training had developed. The symptoms affecting both pilots suggested possible carbon monoxide poisoning or contaminated air supply. The system failures could be related or represent separate emergency. They were at 37,000 feet over mountainous terrain with 240 passengers depending on getting this aircraft safely on the ground, and they had maybe 15 minutes before the first officer became completely incapacitated. She keyed the radio transmit button. "Salt Lake Center, this is November 747 emergency flight. Be advised we have additional personnel in the cockpit with military aviation experience and crisis management training. Request immediate vectors to nearest suitable airport and emergency services standing by. Also recommend medical teams prepared for possible carbon monoxide or air contamination incident affecting flight crew." The controller's response was immediate. "November 747, roger that, understand military trained personnel now assisting. Nearest suitable airport is Salt Lake International, currently 48 miles southeast of your position. Descend immediately to 15,000 vectors to follow. Emergency services are being notified. Say fuel remaining and souls on board." Maya checked fuel gauges and did rapid calculations. Salt Lake Center, fuel is approximately 2 hours, souls on board 243 including crew. She turned to Patricia, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Get the other attendants up here immediately. I need medical personnel if we have any on board to tend to the captain, and I need someone to check air quality sensors throughout the cabin. Also check if any other passengers are feeling symptoms like dizziness or nausea. Move fast but don't create panic." Patricia nodded and disappeared down the aisle. The first officer was struggling to maintain altitude and heading, his movements becoming increasingly sluggish. Maya made a quick decision. "I'm taking the controls. Release and acknowledge." The first officer's hands came off the yoke immediately, relief flooding his face. Controls released. Maya gripped the right side controls and felt the aircraft respond. "I have the controls. Now listen carefully, I need you to stay conscious and talk to me. What's your name?" The first officer blinked, fighting to focus. "Mike." "First Officer Mike Davidson." Maya kept her voice firm but reassuring. "Okay Mike, you're doing great. I need you to breathe slowly and deeply, and tell me everything you remember before you started feeling sick." As Mike struggled to answer, Maya was simultaneously flying the aircraft, monitoring instruments, and processing emergency procedures she had trained for in scenarios exactly like this. She initiated a controlled descent toward 15,000 feet, adjusting power and pitch to maintain safe descent rate while keeping airspeed within normal parameters. The Boeing 737 responded smoothly to her inputs, and she felt the familiar sensation of connection with the machine that all experienced pilots knew. She had flown helicopters primarily during her military service, but her training had included fixed-wing aircraft and she had maintained proficiency. Mike was talking, his words slightly slurred but still coherent. "About 20 minutes ago, maybe longer, I noticed a weird sweet smell in the cockpit. Didn't think much of it. Then Captain Williams said he felt strange, like dizzy, and then he just slumped over. I tried to revive him but couldn't, so I called for the flight attendants and declared the emergency. Then I started feeling it too, and it's getting worse." Maya nodded, her suspicion about contaminated air supply confirming. She looked at environmental system controls and saw they were pulling cockpit air from standard bleed air system off the engines. If there was contamination in that supply, they needed to switch to emergency oxygen immediately. She pointed to oxygen masks stored above the pilot seats. "Mike, put on your oxygen mask right now. Full flow." He fumbled with the mask, and Maya reached over with her left hand to help him secure it while maintaining control with her right. Once his mask was in place and she could see his breathing steadying, she pulled down her own mask and switched it to full flow. The pure oxygen immediately began clearing her head, and she realized she had been starting to feel the effects herself without consciously registering them. Patricia returned with another flight attendant and a man in his 40s wearing casual clothes who identified himself as Dr. Robert Harrison, a cardiologist from Seattle heading home to Washington. Maya kept flying while directing resources with crisp efficiency. "Doctor, the captain may have suffered cardiac arrest, but we also suspect air contamination in the cockpit. Don oxygen equipment before examining him, and be prepared to perform CPR if necessary. Patricia, I need you to check if any passengers are exhibiting similar symptoms, and I need a full count of how many people on board have any aviation, medical, or emergency response training. Also, there should be emergency air quality sensors in the aft equipment bay. Get someone to check the readings." The cockpit was now crowded, but Maya maintained focus on flying the aircraft and navigating toward Salt Lake City. The radio came alive with another transmission. "November 747, Salt Lake Center, descend now to 10,000, turn right heading 120. You are cleared direct to Salt Lake International, expect vectors for ILS runway 34 left. Airport has been notified, emergency equipment is standing by. Be advised we are also scrambling military support from Hill Air Force Base due to the nature of your emergency." Maya acknowledged the instructions and turned the aircraft to the new heading while continuing descent. Mike was looking somewhat better with the oxygen mask on, his color improving and his eyes more focused. She spoke to him through the intercom system built into the masks. "Mike, I need you to help me with the radios and instruments. Can you do that?" He nodded. "Yeah, I think so. The oxygen is helping." Maya managed a quick smile behind her mask. "Good. We're going to get through this together." Dr. Harrison was examining Captain Williams, who remained unconscious but was breathing on his own. "His pulse is weak and irregular but stable for now. I can't give a definitive diagnosis without proper equipment, but it's consistent with either cardiac event or some kind of toxic exposure. He needs advanced medical care as soon as possible." Maya nodded, her hands making constant small adjustments to the controls as they descended through 20,000 feet. The mountains below were clearly visible now, the Wasatch Range rising dramatically from the valley floor, and she could see Salt Lake City in the distance. As they descended through 15,000 feet, Maya's tactical training was already processing multiple scenarios and contingencies. They had approximately 20 minutes until landing, assuming she could maintain current approach speed and the aircraft systems continued functioning. The first officer was stable but not capable of assisting with complex operations. The captain needed immediate medical attention. 240 passengers were depending on precise execution of landing procedures in an aircraft with compromised systems. Salt Lake Center came back with new information. "November 747, be advised Hill Air Force Base is launching 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters to rendezvous with your position and provide escort and emergency support capabilities. They will maintain visual contact during your approach and landing. Call sign is Guardian 1 and Guardian 2. Maya felt a slight chill at that announcement. Black Hawks meant Army aviation, which meant there was a possibility that someone in the military command structure had already connected her presence on this flight with the emergency assistance being provided. She pushed that concern aside and focused on the immediate task. They were now at 10,000 feet and approaching the initial waypoint for the instrument approach into Salt Lake International. The weather was clear, visibility unlimited, and she could see the airport clearly about 15 miles ahead. Patricia returned with her report. 3 passengers were feeling mild dizziness and nausea, consistent with lower-level exposure to whatever had affected the pilots. The air quality sensors showed elevated readings for carbon monoxide throughout the aircraft, though levels in the passenger cabin were much lower than what must have been present in the cockpit. The source appeared to be contaminated bleed air from the number 1 engine, and Patricia had managed to isolate that system following emergency procedures, which had immediately improved the situation. Maya processed this while flying the approach, her hands and feet working the controls with smooth precision as she intercepted the localizer and glide slope for the ILS approach to runway 34 left. Mike was helping now, calling out altitudes and airspeeds, his voice stronger with the oxygen helping clear the contamination from his system. The Boeing 737 descended smoothly through 8,000 feet, then 7,000, tracking perfectly down the invisible radio beam that would guide them to the runway threshold. Through the windscreen, Maya could see the airport growing larger, the parallel runways clearly visible, and emergency vehicles already positioning along the taxiways with their lights flashing. Then 2 dark shapes appeared in her peripheral vision, and she glanced left to see the Black Hawk helicopters taking up formation on either side of the Boeing 737, maintaining perfect station about 200 feet away. The helicopters were UH-60MS, the latest version, bristling with advanced communications equipment and carrying full rescue and medical capabilities. The lead Black Hawk pilot came up on the emergency frequency. November 747, this is Guardian 1 flight lead, we have you in sight and are maintaining escort position. You are looking good on approach, runway is clear, all emergency equipment is standing by. Understand you have military-trained personnel flying the aircraft. Maya keyed her radio. Guardian 1 affirmative. This is Captain Maya Chen, United States Army SOAR, currently assisting with emergency operations aboard this flight. We are stable and continuing approach at this time. There was a brief pause, and she could imagine the conversation happening inside that Black Hawk cockpit as the crew processed her identification. SOAR was the Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the elite Night Stalkers whose reputation preceded them throughout military aviation circles. When the response came, the pilot's voice had changed subtly, carrying a note of respect and recognition. Copy that, Captain Chen. Understand you are Night Stalker qualified. You have full support from Guardian Flight. Call if you need anything. Inside the passenger cabin, people were starting to realize something extraordinary was happening. The Black Hawk escort was visible through the windows, an unmistakable military presence that signaled this was no ordinary emergency. Flight attendants were moving through the aisles, ensuring seatbelts were fastened and preparing passengers for landing, but conversations buzzed with speculation and concern. Maya's seatmate from 23F was staring out the window at the helicopters, her mind racing as she connected the dots between the nervous student who had been sitting beside her and the military pilot apparently now flying the aircraft from the cockpit. Maya continued the approach with total concentration, her training and experience taking over as she worked through the complex procedures. 5,000 feet, 4,000 feet, the runway growing larger in the windscreen as they descended on the glide slope. She called for landing gear down, and Mike operated the controls, 3 green lights illuminating to indicate the gear had extended and locked. Flaps to landing position, speed reducing to approach speed, the Boeing 737 configured perfectly for landing as they crossed the outer marker. The Black Hawks maintained their escort positions, the pilots flying with the precision that marked them as elite military aviators, ready to react instantly if the situation deteriorated. 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet, the runway threshold clearly visible now with its distinctive markings and approach lighting system. Maya made minute corrections to alignment and descent rate, her eyes scanning between the windscreen and the instruments, cross-checking every parameter to ensure they were exactly where they needed to be. Beside her, Mike was calling out altitudes, 1,000 feet, 500, 400, 300. The runway rose to meet them, the landing zone markers passing beneath the nose. Maya pulled the power back to idle and began the flare, the practiced movement of bringing the nose up slightly to arrest the descent and set up for touchdown. The main landing gear contacted the runway with barely a chirp of tires, a smooth touchdown that would have made any commercial pilot proud, and Maya immediately deployed the speed brakes and thrust reversers while applying brakes. The Boeing 737 decelerated smoothly, slowing from landing speed to taxi speed as they rolled down the runway with fire trucks and emergency vehicles pacing them on either side. The Black Hawks had peeled off during the final approach and were now hovering over the runway approach end, their crews watching to ensure the landing was successful. Maya turned off the runway at the designated taxiway where emergency vehicles were waiting, and followed the guidance of a ground controller who marshaled them to an isolated parking area away from the main terminal. As soon as the aircraft came to a complete stop and the engines spooled down, emergency personnel swarmed around it, positioning stairs and equipment while medical teams prepared to board. Maya secured the cockpit controls and helped Mike remove his oxygen mask, both of them breathing hard from the adrenaline and stress of the past 30 minutes. Dr. Harrison was already preparing to transfer Captain Williams to the waiting medical teams. Patricia opened the cockpit door as soon as it was safe, and emergency medical personnel rushed in to attend to the captain. Behind them, Maya could see passengers craning their necks to see into the cockpit, their faces showing confusion, relief, and curiosity about who had been flying the aircraft. She stood and began coordinating with the emergency responders, briefing them on the symptoms, the suspected carbon monoxide contamination, and the condition of all personnel on board. Her military bearing was now fully evident, the student persona completely gone, replaced by the confident special operations officer who had commanded missions in far more dangerous circumstances than this. The Black Hawk helicopters had landed on the taxiway nearby, and Maya saw a group of military personnel approaching the aircraft. The lead figure was a lieutenant colonel in Army flight suit with the SOAR insignia clearly visible on his shoulder. He entered the aircraft and made his way to the cockpit, saluting sharply when he saw Maya. "Captain Chin, I should have known when we got the alert that a special operations officer was assisting with an aviation emergency, it would turn out to be you. Hell of a job bringing that bird down safely." Maya returned the salute with equal precision. "Thank you, sir. Just glad we had the training to handle it." The colonel's expression became more serious. "When the emergency declaration came through and we heard military aviation experience was involved, we ran the passenger manifest through our systems and your cover identity flagged immediately. Given your clearance level and current operational status, Command made the decision to provide direct military support. We're also treating this as a potential security incident until we know whether this was equipment failure or something more deliberate." Maya nodded, understanding the implications. If the contamination wasn't accidental, it meant someone had deliberately tried to cause the deaths of everyone on board, and her presence might not have been coincidental. But those were questions for investigators. Right now, her priority was ensuring all passengers were safe and receiving medical attention. She turned to help coordinate the deplaning operation, which was proceeding smoothly as passengers filed off the aircraft and onto buses that would take them to the terminal. As passengers deplaned, many of them stared at Maya with new awareness, seeing the military personnel treating her with obvious respect and deference. The woman from seat 23F stopped as she reached the door, looking at Maya with wide eyes. "You really weren't just a student, were you?" Maya met her gaze with a slight smile. "I am a student actually. Just not only a student. I'm glad we all made it down safely." The woman shook her head in amazement. "You saved all of our lives. Thank you doesn't seem like enough." Maya touched her shoulder gently. "Just doing what I was trained to do, ma'am. Take care of yourself." The deplaning took another 20 minutes, and during that time federal investigators arrived along with additional military security personnel. The aircraft would be thoroughly examined to determine the source of the contamination and whether it represented equipment failure or sabotage. Captain Williams had been rushed to the nearest trauma center and his condition was stable, while the first officer and the 3 affected passengers were receiving treatment for carbon monoxide exposure and all were expected to make full recoveries. Maya spent 2 hours being debriefed by federal air marshals, National Transportation Safety Board investigators, and military intelligence officers who wanted detailed accounts of everything she had observed and experienced. She described the timeline of events, the symptoms, the system failures, her assessment of the contamination source, and her emergency response decisions. Her training made her an ideal witness because she could provide technical details that most civilian passengers would never have noticed or understood. Several days later, after returning to Fort Belvoir and completing additional debriefing sessions, Maya received word that preliminary findings suggested the contamination had been a maintenance failure rather than deliberate sabotage. The bleed air seal had been improperly serviced during routine maintenance 3 weeks earlier, and the gradual degradation had finally reached critical failure during the flight. It was a sobering reminder that aviation safety depended on countless small decisions and actions, and that sometimes human error could create catastrophic situations even without malicious intent. She was also informed that she would receive the Soldier's Medal, the Army's highest peacetime award for heroism, though the ceremony would be private and the citation carefully worded to protect her classified status. Major General Sarah Hendricks, commander of all Special Operations Aviation assets on the East Coast, personally called to commend her performance and discuss her future assignments. The visibility from the incident meant her deep cover capabilities would be limited for the foreseeable future, but Hendricks assured her there were other roles where her skills and experience would be valuable. Maya accepted a staff position at Joint Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg, working on strategic planning and coordination while maintaining her flight proficiency through regular training. It wasn't the operational flying she loved most, but she recognized it as necessary professional development that would prepare her for future command opportunities. The incident on Flight 447 had revealed her capabilities to the world in a way she had never intended, but it had also reinforced her sense of purpose and her commitment to the demanding career she had chosen. Years later, the story of the military pilot who had emerged from student cover to save hundreds of lives became something of a legend in aviation circles, embellished and mythologized as such stories always are. Maya rarely spoke about it herself, uncomfortable with attention and preferring to focus on ongoing work leading soldiers and conducting operations that served national security objectives. But in quiet moments she would remember that morning over Montana when her two identities had collided, when the student cover she had maintained so carefully had fallen away to reveal the special operations officer underneath, and when the skills and training she had devoted her life to mastering had made the difference between tragedy and survival for everyone aboard that aircraft. The Black Hawk helicopters that had escorted her emergency landing had represented more than just military support during a crisis. They had been a visible reminder that she was part of something larger than herself, part of a community of elite professionals who trained for impossible situations and who held each other to the highest standards of performance and integrity.